So this little DJI Mini 4 Pro of mine is now 1.5 years old. I know, crazy, it's hard to believe. And after hundreds of flights and, it has to be said, several silly crashes, this is still the original drone I am using that I got on release. So now that I've had tons of experience flying this drone, today I'd love to share with you some of the long-term pros and cons I've discovered, and we'll also take a look at some of the new features that have been added since its release that I think make it even better. I also just wanted to say a big thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this video. This is where I go to get all the sound effects and music that I use in my drone videos. Alright, let's talk about the first big pro, and the number one reason I will take this drone with me, especially if I'm going to fly in a busier area such as a tourist hotspot, and that's the fact it's so quiet. In the air, once it's a little bit up and away from you, it pretty much becomes impossible to hear it. It's that quiet. Nobody will pay much attention to you while flying it, which is a big positive. So to show you exactly what I mean, this is what the DJI Mini 4 Pro sounds like when it's at chest height next to you. But if I just put it slightly further back and up into the air now, already you can barely hear it. You can hear the stream next to me more than you can hear the drone. It's just so discreet. Now the next thing I want to talk about is ease of use. Drones these days, in my opinion, have become incredibly easy to fly, and the Mini 4 Pro, well, it's no exception. So I noticed this recently when my partner decided she wanted to have a go, and despite it being one of her first flights, after I gave her a quick rundown of what everything was and did, and a few tips on how to fly safely, she was very quickly capturing smooth footage. Some of it would even put me to shame. So I think, especially if you're somebody who's played games on a games console with a controller, you'll very quickly pick up the drone's controller and feel at home. It's very user-friendly. So if you're somebody who's looking their first drone and you're an absolute beginner, I think the Mini 4 Pro is perfect. And this leads me on to the second big pro. Its size. As you can see, it's absolutely tiny. And even once it's packed with its controller, the entire package just takes up such a small amount of space. Also, this drone only weighs 249 grams, which, trust me, is incredibly light. You'll not notice that additional weight in your camera bag, unlike if you were carrying a larger drone, for example. So if you're somebody like me, who when you go on your adventures, you don't just carry a drone, maybe you have an additional camera, extra batteries, a tripod, some filters, you'll know that hauling all that extra weight around on your back can be a complete pain. Well, I find there's really no penalty to carrying the Mini 4 Pro with you because it's so light. And also because it's under 250 grams, and is a C0 class drone, there's much fewer restrictions on how and where you can fly it. Now before we talk about the first con I have discovered with the DJI Mini 4 Pro, I'm curious, if you own this drone, what is your favourite and least favourite thing about it? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, now to keep things balanced, what would I say has been the biggest drawback of this drone after flying it for a year and a half? And I have to say it's these. So these small lightweight batteries help to keep the drone under 250 grams, but that does come at the cost of flight time. So DJI say each battery will get you 34 minutes of flight time, but take it from me, that's never going to happen. On average, I'm getting between 20 to 23 minutes if it's a calm day, but on windier days, I have seen this drop as low as 15 minutes. So one battery is definitely not enough. By the time you put the drone in the air, find a few good angles, change a few settings and start recording, you'll probably find your battery is nearly done. So at the very least, I recommend picking up the Fly More combo that comes with 3 batteries and a charging hub, and this will give you more time that you can fly your drone so that you don't have to rush when capturing footage. Switching back to the positives now, and another big one is the video quality. Honestly, it's super impressive, and after using this drone for a year and a half, I've never once came home and looked at the footage I've captured with it and thought, that's not good enough. The 1/1.3 inch sensor allows you to shoot up to 4K 60fps HDR video, or if you want to slow things down, there's also a slow motion mode allowing you to capture up to 100 FPS at 4K, or an even slower 200 FPS at 1080p. I also like the fact the camera can rotate, so unlike something like the more expensive Air 3S, which has a camera that can't rotate and only uses a digital crop to produce 2.7K vertical video, the Mini 4 Pro can output true 4K vertical video, and because I post a lot to Instagram, I use this feature all the time. The Mini 4 Pro sensor also has a nice low aperture of f1.7, which lets in lots of light, and I find that makes this drone capable of capturing phenomenal low light and nighttime footage. You also get 3 color modes. So firstly, you get the traditional normal color mode, which will produce footage that looks beautiful and saturated straight from the drone. However, there is 2 settings changes I recommend changing to get the best results when using this color mode. So firstly, out of the box, I find the footage that comes from the Mini 4 Pro just looks too sharp. It has a digital, unnatural look to it. So to get around this, you can actually go into the settings and lower the sharpness setting to get much more natural looking footage. Secondly, I've also found the Mini 4 Pro loves to overexpose its highlights. So those are the white areas of the image. So if it's a really bright sunny day or a bright sunset, for example, those areas just look way too bright and lose definition. So again, to get around this, if you're using the auto exposure mode, I recommend you lower the exposure compensation value to -0.3, and this lowers those highlights just a little bit and brings back the definition in those areas. Now with the Mini 4 Pro, you also get HLG and D-Log-M, and I have to say the D-Log-M footage that comes from this drone, it's beautiful. Now while we're talking about video quality, something else that in my experience can take your drone footage from bland and uninteresting to exciting and engaging is music and sound effects. So let me show you an example. Let's take a look at a drone sequence that uses generic music, so just any old song I found on the internet that was copyright free, and no sound effects. And then let's take a look at this same sequence, but this time using music and sound effects that was carefully selected to match the scene. So, what do you think? Which sequence did you prefer? I think you'll agree the second one is much more professional and engaging. But this leads us on to a bigger question. Where can you easily and quickly find high quality music and sound effects? Well, this is where I want to introduce today's sponsor, Epidemic Sound. I have been using their massive library of professional music and sound effects for years, and they make it super easy to find exactly what you need, with categories for pop, hip hop, electronic, and even my favourite, cinematic. There isn't a genre or mood they don't have the perfect music for. And if you're struggling to find the perfect track, my favourite feature of their platform is that if there is a mainstream copyrighted song that you really want to use, you can just go to Epidemic Sound, search that song, and Epidemic Sound will show you all the different alternatives that are restriction free you can use that sound similar to the song you like. And they also have a massive library of sound effects as well. I'm yet to come across a sound effect I needed, such as water rushing from a waterfall, boots walking in snow, or coastal seagulls, for example, that they didn't have. Now, if you're looking for recommendations of good music you can use in your drone videos, I've made this easy. I've popped a link in the description down below to a playlist on Epidemic Sound with all the tracks I'm currently using. And if you haven't tried out their platform yet, now's the perfect time. I've also added a link down below where you can get a free trial to their platform, so be sure to check it out. Now, something I have been less than impressed with is the zoom. With the Mini 4 Pro, you can zoom up to 3 times when recording in 4K, but this is just a digital zoom, meaning it's just cropping in on the image and then expanding it back out, so that destroys the image quality, and I never ever use it for that reason. It would be great to see a lossless 2x tele mode added if possible, just like what was recently added via a firmware update to the DJI Pocket 3 to give us a zoom that is much more usable. Now, over the past year and a half of flying, something else that has impressed me with this little camera is its photo quality. With the Mini 4 Pro allowing you to capture JPEG or RAW images, should you want more flexibility when editing, and these can be captured at 12 megapixels or 48 megapixels resolution. But which resolution should you use to get the best results from this camera? Well, I personally have discovered the 48 megapixel option to be the most desirable during the day, allowing for a higher resolution image with more detail, but then I also recommend using the 12 megapixel mode if you're capturing images at night, as once the light fades, the 48 megapixel mode does get a little noisier, so the 12 megapixel option becomes the better one as it produces cleaner images. Now, one of the biggest selling points of the DJI Mini 4 Pro when it released was the omnidirectional obstacle avoidance system. So thanks to 4 vision sensors on the top and 2 on the bottom, this drone can see and avoid obstacles in all directions. But in reality, in real world use, how good is it? Well, I find the obstacle avoidance of the Mini 4 Pro to work fantastically well. But more importantly, I trust it. So unlike something like the DJI Flip, I really don't trust that drone's obstacle avoidance. It's let me down 1 times too many. Not only has the Mini 4 Pro not let me down in this area, but also it's actually saved me several times from colliding with obstacles that I didn't see coming because they were unsighted as I was flying sideways or backwards. Also, a feature that I really can't live without anymore, especially when flying closer to obstacles, that wasn't available on release but was later added, is Vision Assist. And this allows you to see a black and white feed out of those vision sensors in a different direction to the drone's camera, allowing you to navigate it much more safely. And with a more recent update, they've now made it possible to place this Vision Assist window anywhere you want on the screen, so you can continue using it and the mini-map at the same time. Very handy. Now, with that being said, the obstacle avoidance system does have 1 or 2 limitations that you should know about. It's not completely foolproof. It does have the same pitfalls as pretty much every other drone I've flown. So things like really thin branches, telephone or electricity cables, it will struggle to see. So when you're flying, it's important to know where the smaller, finer obstacles are so that you can keep your drone away from them or fly safely above them. And this conveniently brings me on to talk about durability. Now, being completely honest with you guys, I've crashed this drone, I would say, around a dozen times since I've owned it for various silly reasons, such as forgetting I'd turned off obstacle avoidance. I know, so stupid. Or flying around in sport mode, where obstacle avoidance turns off. And despite that, the drone's held up really well. As mentioned, this is still the original drone I got on release. Now, I will admit, when I first got the drone, I did feel it felt pretty fragile. The plastics in some areas are really thin, particularly on the top. You can deform it quite a lot. But in reality, I found out this drone is extremely durable. Now, yes, if you fly at full speed into a concrete wall, you're sending it straight to the graveyard. But for the odd crash into a tree or crashes where it has a softer landing, maybe onto grass, I find the most damage that ever occurs is a broken propeller or 2. And these are really easily changed. In saying that, speaking of the propellers, I do have 2 niggles in this area. So firstly, these are screwed in, unlike something like the R3S, which has push and twist propellers, and this is much more convenient because if you are out and you crash and you break a propeller and need to change it, if you forget a screwdriver, you're stuck. You can't actually change the propeller on location. And this has happened to me, and it can be so frustrating, especially once you've hiked an hour and a half to a location. We'll not talk about that. Secondly, although DJI does provide a little screwdriver with the Mini 4 Pro, frankly, it's awful. It feels slightly too big for the screws, and because it's awkward to use, I've had to actually strip the heads off the propeller screws, which has caused a world of pain trying to get them off. So do yourself a favor and get a decent one, and I'll put a link in the description down below to the one I use and recommend. Now, when considering a compact drone such as the Mini 4 Pro, wind resistance, it's a real concern. But despite the fact it's a small, lightweight drone, it can handle wind speeds that actually make you question, how is this drone managing to do that? It's super impressive. And I've extensively tested this because over the past year or so in Northern Ireland, I'm not sure why, but it feels like every single day we're getting really high wind speeds. You really can't escape it. And despite that, I find the Mini 4 Pro still remains relatively easy to fly. Importantly, it doesn't drift around too much, and it still produces smooth footage. The 3-axis mechanical gimbal does a great job of keeping that footage smooth, even when the drone is moving around a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, if the wind speeds are really high, you will start to notice some movement in your footage. Although what I have noticed is, this becomes really noticeable when the drone is close to a subject or low to the ground, because you have a reference point to see that movement. But if you put the drone higher up into the air, while it will still be moving around the same amount, because that reference point is further away, the footage doesn't look as shaky. Now, another big positive of the Mini 4 Pro, and one of its key features, has to be the super powerful Active Track 360 system. And this is fantastic. I really like that it allows you to not only choose the orientation the drone will track you from, but also if you want it to follow you from a close or far distance. Now, the tracking is a feature that I use pretty much every time I'm out flying this drone because I'm always out flying myself. And honestly, I could not ask for more when it comes to tracking reliability. In my usage, it always remains logged in the subject, flies a smooth path while tracking, and even if you go out of sight and reappear, it will pick you back up. Now, with Active Track 360, you can also drag your finger on the trace wheel on the bottom left of the controller, and this allows you to create custom maneuvers for the drone to fly around you as it tracks you. And when I initially got the drone, I thought, this feature looks really cool, I'm going to use it all the time. But being completely honest, after doing a few initial tests, I never really find myself using it. And that's because if you're doing a long track, once you draw a path on that trace wheel and the drone completes it, you then have to stop what you're doing, draw a new path, carry on moving, and then once that path completes, you again have to stop and draw a new one. I find it's very distracting. It's continually interrupting what you're doing. So instead, a feature that I find myself using much more when it comes to tracking is the auto mode. Now, this was added after the release, and when this is turned on, the system will plan the tracking route automatically. You don't need to draw anything on the compass. You just frame the subject you want the drone to track, such as yourself, and the Mini 4 Pro will automatically plan and perform different, unique, and interesting moves as it's tracking you. You don't need to keep stopping and drawing paths on that trace wheel, interrupting whatever it is you're doing. You just let the drone do it for you. With the Mini 4 Pro, you can also track vehicles such as cars, and I've got some beautiful shots doing this, although the ability to choose between close and far tracking distances does disappear when tracking vehicles, which is a shame. Now, something else I love about the Mini 4 Pro is the fact it comes loaded with pretty much all the features and modes you will ever need. And compared to the more expensive models, there isn't really many features it's lacking. So you get basic features such as quick shots, master shots, which is where the drone will automatically capture multiple drone moves of your subject to create a finished sequence you can use, hyperlapses, panoramas, and more. But you also get more advanced features such as cruise control, which essentially acts like the cruise control on your car, allowing you to start a movement with the joysticks, enable cruise control, and now you can take your fingers off the joysticks and the drone will continue doing that move. And currently, this is my favorite feature that I love playing around with to get more dynamic shots of myself exploring locations, as unlike with tracking, using cruise control, I can have the drone move independently to myself to get more interesting clips. And we also have waypoints, an incredibly powerful function that lets you create pre-planned flight routes for your drone to automatically fly along, and this is repeatable. So you can have the drone fly the exact same route multiple days or months apart, for example. Now, hands up if you remember how bad the Mini 3 Pro's transmission was. Yeah, it was pretty bad. I had regular transmission dropouts with that drone, even when it wasn't far away from me. It was probably its biggest weakness. So when I first got the Mini 4 Pro, this was one of my biggest concerns. Have they fixed the transmission issues? And after using this drone for a year and a half in a range of different environments, I can safely say, yes, they have fixed it. The Mini 4 Pro launched with the newer OcuSync 4 system, which has a max transmission distance of 20 kilometers FCC and 10 kilometers CE. And what that means in the real world is you can pretty much fly this drone as far away as you want, and more importantly, legally can. Honestly, the transmission is fantastic. In wide open areas, I literally never have any transmission issues, and even if I'm flying in somewhere with a lot more obstacles, such as a forest, I can still easily fly pretty far away before I start to see any breakup. Even if flying momentarily behind an obstacle, such as a tree, I still rarely have any issues. It's fantastic. Moving on, let's talk controllers, and I do have a con with one of them. Now, the DJI Mini 4 Pro can be picked up with either the DJI RC M2, that's the controller you attach your phone to, or if you can afford it, and I know it's not a small additional cost, I really recommend picking up the DJI RC2. That's a controller with a Screen Belt M. Ever since the original DJI RC M1 released, I've not actually went back to using the controller you attach your phone to. You see, the controllers with this screen are just so much more convenient. You simply bring it out of your camera bag, turn it on, and you're good to go. You don't need to faff about attaching your phone. And I also really like that it keeps your phone independent from the flying experience, so your camera preview won't get interrupted if you get a phone call, for example. Now, the DJI RC2 did get these upgraded fold-out antennas, which also helps the transmission, and the processors inside were improved, making it faster and less laggy when changing modes or functions. With that being said, after using this controller extensively, I have found one niggle. Now, it's not a deal breaker, but it is something you should be aware of and something I hope to see improved in future versions, and that's the screen brightness. You see, the DJI RC2 has a max screen brightness of 700 nits. And generally speaking, it's quite overcast or cloudy in Northern Ireland, and in these conditions, or in low light or at night time, the screen brightness is absolutely fine. But if it's a sunnier day, especially when the sun is highest in the sky, the screen can become quite dull. Now, it's not so bad you can't see what you're doing, but it does make doing things like checking the exposure or white balance quite difficult. So you end up looking for and flying from shaded areas. So this is something you can pretty easily work around, but I do hope in future models this is something that's improved, because really it's the only niggle with what is a fantastic controller. So even though this drone came out way back in September 2023, 1.5 years later, is it still the king of compact drones? In my opinion, absolutely. And being honest, this is my favorite drone of all time. I have no problem saying that whatsoever. It's so small and convenient, but still provides impressive video quality, reliability, and performance. And I really think for 95% of people, this drone will give you more than you ever need. And I find myself recommending it to pretty much everyone. Now, with that said, inevitably we will see a Mini 5 Pro at some point. But at a guess, I don't think we'll see that until at least the end of the year. So if you're in the market for a drone right now, I wouldn't hold off. This is hands down the best compact drone that's available right now. And if you do go ahead and pick up this drone, or you already own it, then here is a video going over 5 tips that make it even better, that I highly recommend checking out by clicking up here or by clicking the link in the description down below.